So, okay, we left off with the speed of light. I think, these theories that the speed of light is slowed down radically over our existence, it makes a whole lot of things fit. Let's see, where are we at next? Kim was bringing up some stuff here, and I'll kind of touch on some of that a little bit before we go back to other things. We talked about like the fossils and some kind of how they indicate that some kind of cataclysmic event happened, and biblically we believe that cataclysmic event was the flood, Noah's flood, and then the ark, and how God said humanity is so messed up. I'm sorry I ever created it. We're going to start over. So if one of my favorite books is this, In the Beginning. Dr. Brown, it's also the Creation Institute, or the Ark Encounter down in Tennessee. There's that whole group that's put together an understanding, a scientific understanding based on physical evidence and scripture that explains how the flood happened. And basically, so plate tectonics states that over millions of years, the continents of Europe and America, Africa and South America, have drifted apart, and that at some point they were connected, and that's how life forms intermingled, and how we have evolution happening in a similar fashion all the way around the globe. So evolutionists use plate tectonics. He coined something called hydrotectonics, in which his preposition is that at one point the Earth had a landmass over top of a layer of water that surrounded the whole globe. So there's a layer of landmass, 10, 15, 50 miles thick, with a layer of water 10, 15 miles thick underneath it. And in Genesis, it talks about, like, at that moment of time, the fountains of the deep erupted and exploded. And so it's not just that rain happened for 40 days. There's this source of water that came from underneath. So he uses that scripture and reference along with physical evidence around the globe. The mid-oceanic ridges are evidences of where this water underneath is building up in temperature and pressure, and at one point this landmass around the perimeter or outside of this water couldn't handle the pressure anymore, and it cracks. And it cracks along these mid-oceanic ridges. So the Earth cracks, it starts moving quickly. Not millions of years, but in the period of the flood, we're talking over the period of a year, all of this stuff is moving. We're talking a cataclysmic event it's worse than an asteroid hitting the Earth. This stuff is moving, and it's releasing this pressure on the inner core, and you see the land underneath that inner layer of water explode upward as this pressure is released. So what's going on is, as this cracks happen, this water is being pressured by the weight of all of the Earth that's on top of it. And we've got geysers that are 5,000 miles long and going up miles high and spreading this water. Not only is it rain, it's like water that's coming out from the inner part of the Earth, and it's picking up debris as it's gushing out, and it's spreading that debris in layer after layer after layer on top of the Earth, and capturing life forms in a second, in the middle of giving birth, in the middle of eating other animals, in the meeting of just hunting and preying. That's his explanation that explains the fossils. His theory goes on. It goes really deep. It explains the Grand Canyon. It explains, like, these vast amounts of debris that are washed down by all of these different water forms. He explains, he uses physical evidence to explain where these ginormous lakes occurred for a while after the flood, where, this water is like descending and distributing itself. These land masses are moving very rapidly, and just using, physics to explain why the Rocky Mountains happen and the Smoky Mountains happen, and things like that. Why there's certain rings where volcanoes are very likely. And he uses it to explain where oil deposits are and salt deposits are. And he makes predictions that, there's certain places around the earth where we're going to find vast amounts of underwater left, and there's certain places where we're going to find oil. I would be willing to bet on his predictions because it explains everything else, and it explains it really quickly. So, speed of light is, like, I would argue, it's another one of those clocks that we could use. But there's other clocks, a whole plethora of other clocks that we could use. Let's see, which one called? Decay of the lunar orbit. The moon, we know for a fact, is getting further and further away from the Earth. As it gets further and further away from the Earth, because of the Einstein's laws of motion, it has to slow down in order for gravity and centrifugal force to balance out. So it's because of the speed it's going around the Earth, the centrifugal force pushing it away is counteracted by gravity holding it in. So as it drifts further away, there's less gravity, so it slows down, so the centrifugal force and stuff match. But if we take the rate that the moon is drifting away from the Earth and plot that back thousands of years, millions of years, it had to be significantly closer to the Earth than what it is now. We know that the tides that move around the Earth is just the gravitational force of the moon pulling on that water and creating this bubble of water that moves around the Earth as the moon goes around. If the moon was, let's say, a third closer to the Earth than it is now, it would create a tidal wave miles tall that would go around the Earth. It would wipe out everything. Life could not exist on the Earth a million years ago. The tidal waves would wipe it all out. If you look at, one of my favorite movies is Interstellar. It's, what is that? Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. But one of the planets that they go to, they land, it's covered with, the whole planet is covered with a layer of water that's this deep. You can walk through it. But shortly after landing on the planet, they see this mountain range in the distance. And, blank. The mountain range is moving and it's coming at us. It's not a mountain range, it's a wall of water that is coming at them. And this wall of water is following the moon of that planet around and around. And there is no life on the planet. The spaceship that had landed on this planet before them was disintegrated in an instant because they hit that wave. Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway find a way to get off the planet before the wave hits them, but it's scary. But it's just like, what's that?
Spoiler alert.
Oh, there's a lot more. I love the movie. So, but basically, the decay of the lunar orbit is another clock that says that the Earth can't be that old. So another one, you can read that. Bent rock layers. If sedimentary rock is layers on layers of rocks that happen millions of years apart from each other, the layers on the bottom would have to become solid enough to create this. We got a fish, it's rock, it doesn't, if we're so inclined, this isn't going to bend, it's going to break. But there's places all around the Earth where we see these layers of sedimentary rock that do this. And then there's later points where they crack. If these layers were deposited over millions of years, the top layers could bend, but the bottom layers would have had to crack because they would have solidified long before those upper layers would have been deposited. So that's one soft tissue and fossils. We've got dinosaur bones that allegedly they have to be millions of years old. If that's the case, if they're millions of years old, there shouldn't be any more soft tissue left inside the bones. But there is. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. They can't. There's a lot of stuff about, it's one thing to have a fossil, but it's another thing where we find Sue, the T-Rex that's up at the Field Museum, where we find all of the bones. That's something you can get DNA from, and there's soft tissue still inside there. So that shouldn't be there. Faint sun paradox. From what we understand, the sun is getting brighter. It used to be much dimmer before. And if that's the case, again, in the period of millions of years, life on Earth couldn't have existed. It would have. We should have been freezing cold not that long ago. It's the rate of the sun getting hotter doesn't conform to the whole timeline of what evolution requires. Rapidly decaying magnetic fields. That one's scary. So the magnetic field in the Earth used to be significantly stronger than what it is now, and we can measure that by looking at the evidence of magnetic fields in existing rocks. So there's, again, I think it's the book in the beginning. It maps out what the geological rocks document as the strength of the magnetic field, and it's slowly deteriorating. We need the magnetic field. We use it for all of our navigation. Our GPS systems won't work without that magnetic field. There's all kinds of things, our electric motors, all of this stuff depends on that magnetic field, but it's deteriorating. And if you map out that magnetic field based on the rocks, there was a drastic shift in the magnetic field when the flood happened, or which corresponds with that time frame of the flood, and it dropped radically, and then it fluctuated up and down really quick, and then after a period it settled down, and then kind of assimilated that curve again. So the flood explains these shifts in the magnetic field. It explains the sedimentary rock. It explains bent layers of sedimentary rock. It also explains this evidence of what's going on with our magnetic field. But as this magnetic field continues to deteriorate, something drastic is going to happen. Anyway, but the magnetic field, also that rate of decay, it's not possible for the Earth to be that old to go through the rate of decay that it's going through. Number 6, helium and rocks, I don't know enough to talk about. Carbon-14, coal, diamonds, again, the rate of decay doesn't match up with millions of years. It only matches up with thousands of years. Comets, the amount of salt in the sea. We know that our oceans are getting saltier and saltier over time. So the salt content in the ocean is a result of rivers picking up minerals and elements as they flow down through the mountains. They pick up salt, they go into the oceans, the water in the oceans evaporate, and it's like a distilling process. You distill all the water out, and it leaves the salt behind. So our oceans are getting saltier and saltier as this whole process of water and evaporation happens. We know the rate that our oceans are getting saltier, and it only matches up to like 10,000 years, to the point where the oceans had zero salt in them. It's the science, the chemicals don't. Yes, Kim?
So what I think you're saying is that the moon and the sea and the sun, everything has changed so much in the last 10 years.
10,000.
10,000 years. That it's impossible to imagine life being sustainable, even any kind of cell, any kind of thing,
Yeah.
for millions of years, because it wouldn't have been inhabitable.
Correct. Yeah. So there's evidence that the Earth just isn't that old. And if some of these things did exist, life couldn't have existed. It wouldn't work.
Right.
So, again, some of these things I felt like didn't do a deep enough dive to talk about. But there's enough of them there that like say the same thing. So, whatchamacallit, the last evidence that evolutionists use is this idea that we can see examples of evolution happening. We can see the finches that Darwin looked at on the Galapagos Islands and see the different variations. And it's just evidence that we can see this. The issue with that, they use black moss in England and white moss in England. There's these areas in England where there's these moss, and there was this period where the factories in the area were generating so much smog that they turned these white trees black. And these white moss on the black trees stood out like a sore thumb, and birds snuffed them all out. But what happened is these moss changed, transformed, or kind of bred themselves into a darker color. They became black moss that concealed themselves in the trees. And, their defense mechanism just changed through evolution to become black moss, and thus they're able to survive. It's an example of Darwin's theory, random mutations, survival of the fittest. Black moss work on dark trees better than white moss do. Breeds of dogs, at one point evolution, there's one dog. We see there's, Chihuahuas and Great Danes and all of those kind of things, and we can breed dogs. We can create evolution in dogs to make dogs better for whatever purpose that we want. There's horses, donkeys, mules, finches, humans, red and yellow, black and white. It's just like we see that stuff. The issue with this is that no matter what we do, we can't get evolution. We've tried. We can't get a dog and a cat to breed together. We can't get a donkey and pig to breed together. It's like there's only evolution, which this kind of microevolution, yes, it happens. But macroevolution, there has never been an observed evidence of evolution happening between two species or from one species to another species. It doesn't happen. There's no evidence that says that macroevolution could exist. So, from there, let's see, we still got a half hour. Good, this might work out good. Irreducibly other evidences for creation. So we've got the evidences that evolutionists hold true for their side of the theory. But then there's some other lines of thought, lines of evidence that creationists propose that also support this idea that creation happened. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Irreducibly complex systems. The idea of a mousetrap that's it's like you can't reduce that system anymore. If we were to look at what evolutionists would claim is the first form of life that would happen, it's an animal cell or a plant cell, one of those two. So somehow these cells occurred, but they're kind of like that mousetrap, but that mousetrap times 1,000,000, because this cell has a reproductive system, a digestive system, a nervous system. It's got a shell system, and every one of those systems is incredibly complex. And without any one of those portions of that system, the cell doesn't exist. It doesn't survive. It doesn't reproduce. And not only that cell is like insanely complex just to begin with, for that cell to live, it's not just that it has to have its own reproductive system and nervous system. It has to have a whole environment around it with enough protein, amino acids, and oxygen for that cell to survive. And all of those systems are also insanely complex and interrelated. It's like just this whole premise that, it's like if you read evolutionary theory, there's a point where there was this big cosmic goo, and that's the term they use, cosmic goo, that is hit by some kind of electrical charge, bolts of lightning that hit it, and it's almost kind of like Harry Potter. The cell happens because a bolt of lightning hits cosmic goo. And so that's that. Irreducibly complex systems. If you look at our human bodies, they're incredible, they're magnificent. Which book is it? Oh, here, this one. Michael Bay, Darwin's Black Box. He's the one that talks about that irreducibly complex systems. But he goes through like the human body and different things. He spends like a whole chapter talking about what happens when you get a cut and how your body heals itself. It's like, there's this army of cells inside of us, and there's these leader cells and manager cells that come in, assess the problem, and then bring in the right cells and actually create new cells to be able to create whatever's needed to do the healing that's caused by a cut, by a cancer, or whatever. It's insane. The stuff that goes on inside of our bodies is a far bigger miracle than we know. Okay, so anyway, historical evidence, that's that whole idea, Chinese, Minoan, Himalayan, all of these different cultures all throughout the earth, totally separate from each other, have calendars that all date the earth around the same period of time. The whole geological evidence, the flood explains the history, the form, the shape of earth, the animal distribution, all of that much better and much simpler than evolution does. Pre-biological evolution, so survival of the fittest and random mutations explains, it's a good theory, it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't explain this. This is a periodic table of all of the elements that we know of. There's 103 elements in the chart right now, and we've got hydrogen and oxygen and iron and gold and all those different things, and that all makes sense. But if you look at the elements, it's the order, the beauty, the poetry. It's not just that they make up everything that we know. There's an art form to this periodic table that is part of a recipe that determines the way we look, how tall we are, how plants grow, how the musical octave works. Everything in all of creation is created by a simple proportioning system. 1 to 1.618. It's called the golden mean, golden rectangle. The height of my body, the distribution of my bones, all of it is proportioned according to the golden mean. The periodic table, the weights, and all of the characteristics of all of the elements are proportioned according to this golden mean. The Nautilus shell, the musical octave, the arrangement of the planets, the growth of plants, the whole sequence of our DNA is proportioned according to the same proportioning system. It's beautiful. It's mind-boggling. The greatest architects in the history of the earth all use this proportioning system to build their buildings, the pyramids, the Parthenon, the cathedrals. Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, all use the same proportioning system because they believed it's the universal proportion of beauty. It's what this also calls the divine proportion or the God proportion. It only makes sense that something beyond us wove all of this stuff together. So let's see. So, yeah, I think that whole beauty thing was that last one. It's like, this is just wow. I love using the golden mean in the architecture work that I do. So, my real life is an architect, and it's fun. You know, it's like this recipe for beauty. It's not a recipe for science. It doesn't make a building function any better. It's just like the proportions look better. And, you know, our face is proportioned according to the golden mean, our height, the distance between our joints and stuff like that. All fits according to this proportioning system. So, that's about it. Okay, so questions. Kim, I almost see a question in your face. It's like there's something dying to come out here.
So I'm thinking, high school was a really long time ago for me, and a couple of years at least. And back then, I think they taught evolution, but not really strongly. And they kind of said, yeah, this is evolution, but don't worry that it doesn't match the Bible, because it kind of does. And they said something like, a day to God is 100 million years or something. And they had this nice way of fitting everything together. So you didn't worry your pretty little head about it, and you just moved on, you know? But it's quite a radical idea to think that life, everything, that there was blackness, darkness, and then everything.
Yeah.
What did you say, 6,000 to
6,000
years ago?
I believe the Earth is 6,000 years old.
Okay. So
But it could be 6 to 10. I'm okay with that.
Okay, so let's say 6,000, which is a number I understand.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't seem that long ago.
No.
And it brings Adam and Eve much closer. And it brings a relevancy and maybe even a closeness to God. To know that we're part of this experiment that's just 6,000 years old. You know, I mean, that's kind of cool.
Uh-huh. Yeah, to me this is a great big head rush.
Yeah,
it's just like one, you know, it adds meaning to the stuff that I do in my daily life.
Exactly.
When I'm designing a building, I'm participating with God to create something. It's like in the beginning God created, so we are created in His image. That means we are created creative beings. I believe every one of us has got some kind of art form that's just a creativity that's built into us, whether it's a gift of speaking, a gift of art, music, the way you think, the way you dress. You know, we all think in creative ways. And I think that's part of our being created in God's image. And that,
You know, one of the cool things about it is that the scripture says that out of his wisdom he created. You know, somewhere in there says it. And if you think about all the elements, you showed all the elements up there. He knew in advance that we, since we're made in his image, we also create. He gave us all these elements to be able to create. They just didn't happen. They were put here for us to create. You got the drywall, the gypsum, you got the stuff that make this, you got the stuff that make steel. On top of that, he gave us the imagination and all that kind of stuff. But one thing I just got, I don't know if they ever figured this out, where did the universe come from?
I mean, according to
Because according to the Bible, it says he created the heavens and the universe and the earth. And
yes,
so, and if I understand, they had talked about it's still expanding.
right,
And so, if we just came from goo, there was no clouds, no thunder, no lightning, and electricity goes to get this goo. You know, it don't make no sense to me. You know?
and to an evolutionist, God doesn't make sense to them.
Yeah.
They don't want to acknowledge that there's something, you know, it has to do with like some of the same things that God created the flood for in the first place, or the Tower of Babel, that man thought he had the wherewithal to build something to be God, that he could rise up to that. It's like when we think of ourselves as being God, and we don't need God, that we do massively, and you know, it's happening in the world today where, you know, we redefine sex or we redefine life. It's like I kind of believe that we're heading towards another one of those cataclysmic events.
Magnetic field.
A good one, I hope.
I believe it's going to be good and horrifically bad.
Right.
But you know, the Bible is full of parallels. You know, it's like whenever there is a prophecy, there was an immediate reference to that prophecy, and there was a long-term reference, and then there's a future reference to all of those prophecies. So, if the Earth is 6,000 years old, I believe that kind of conforms to the 6 days of creation, and that there is a 7th day of rest that's on the horizon. There's something cool coming, and I hope I get to see it in my lifetime. But you know, if that's number and parallels or something that run throughout the whole Bible, and that just seems like the kind of thing God would do. You know, 6 days of creation, 6,000 years, and a 7th day of rest that's coming.
I think that's one of the things, I mean, you touched on it in the beginning, is that these scientists get to a spot where, I mean, everything's just a chemical reaction, and it doesn't, life has no meaning then, and just no purpose, and the darkness that you've got to be in when you realize that has to be horrendous. Because you really, love doesn't matter, our existence, nothing matters.
Right and wrong, morality don't exist. One of the things I love to do, up in Barrington, there's a place called Fermilab. I love doing a deep dive into that side of the table as much as I like going to that side of the table. So, like reading Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, you know, that's like, he describes, it's the whole evolutionary Big Bang to today thing, and all of these other guys are like, you know, part of that whole thing. But going to Fermilab, it's like, this is where some of the most cutting edge research in everything is happening. And it's right here in our backyard. And they've got this lecture series that happens on one Friday a month. And they just talk about the cool things that they're doing in like an everyday, somewhat everyday language. They explain what they're doing. The figuring out, in my lifetime, they've figured out that atoms exist. They figured out, this happened in my lifetime, that, we know there's atoms, that they're made of electrons and protons and neutrons. But Fermilab has been the research lab that found that electrons and protons and neutrons are made up of quarks. There's 6 quarks. Fermilab discovered 5 of them. And then there was the last one, the Higgs-Boson, that they built a new super collider in CERN, Switzerland. And it's like 10 times the size of our collider. They were able to find the Higgs-Boson quark there. So, it's like I get a rush off of seeing that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, how far? Now they know that quarks are made up of leptons and neutrinos. It's like, how far does this deep dive go? Where does it end? But, so these guys, hyperspace and warp passages are just other ways of trying to figure out on that side of the fence how this whole thing makes sense.
So how do they know that they're finding it and they're not making it?
Well, what they're, if you understand the dynamics of the Large Hadron Collider that they've got at Fermilab, takes atoms, different types of atoms, and they take 2 atoms simultaneously and they spin them around this ginormous loop at close to the speed of light, and then at the right moment they steer these atoms so they collide head on at a location where they've got all of these super sensitive detection devices, and they record what happens when these atoms collide. And it's looking at the different colors of light and energy that emanate from this explosion that they're able to find these subatomic particles.
Yeah, well, I'm
By the way, just a note of this side note. Lockport is an insanely cool community. It's like there's something in our water that generates genius.
Oh, give me a gallon.
Jim Pearson is a native of Lockport. He developed a company called Kinetic Systems. He just passed away a few years ago. But he worked at Fermilab with the development of the super collider. And he is the one that developed the computer processing system that enabled them to steer an atom at the speed of light with the degree of accuracy that you could get 2 atoms to collide head-on at a specific location in that loop. He's from Lockport. His technology is being used all over the world. Somebody else has bought that same company, and they're using his ideas for our military, for space exploration. It's like, it's mind-boggling what this guy from Lockport did. So anyway, that's kind of cool. If I could add one more thought.
Yes.
I love this stuff. I eat it up. It's like, I'm kind of a geeky nerd that I just eat this stuff up. But I've never once found that I've led somebody to Christ with this stuff. It's like, knowledge doesn't do it. It's like you're not going to win an argument based on this stuff. It's like Jesus loves us. That wins. That's what convinces people that he's real. This stuff is, for me, it's like there's certain things that are important. One, Jesus is the Christ. He's the Son of the living God, and it's his sacrifice that he died for us, that we are forgiven and get to spend the rest of eternity with him in heaven. The other one is, this book is true. It doesn't it's the absolute that we can build everything on. So this stuff is just fun. It
Right.
just kind of gets me excited that, you know, it's like evidence that my faith is real. And I don't have to commit intellectual suicide to believe it.